If you grew up in the 1950s, falling in love didn't start with a swipe. It didn't start with a profile picture or a carefully crafted bio. It started with a look, across a crowded dance floor, through the window of a diner, at a church social, in the hallway between classes. One moment, they were just another face in the crowd, and the next, the whole world narrowed to just them. That's how it began, with a glance that lasted half a second too long, with a smile that made your stomach flip, with a sudden, undeniable awareness that something had changed, and once you felt it, there was no going back. But falling in love in the 1950s wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something you did in private, hidden behind a screen. It was public, visible, governed by rules that everyone understood, even if no one said them out loud. You didn't just walk up and ask someone out, not right away. First you had to be introduced, properly, by a mutual friend, a sibling, someone who could vouch for you, or you had to work up the courage to approach them yourself. Heart pounding, palms sweating, every word rehearsed 100 times in your head. "Hi, I'm wondering if maybe you'd like to go to the dance with me on Saturday," and then you'd wait, for what felt like an eternity, while they smiled, or blushed, or glanced at their friends for approval. "I'd like that." 3 words. And suddenly, the whole world was brighter. But before that first date even happened, there was protocol. If you were a boy, you didn't just pick her up and go. You had to meet her parents. You had to sit in the living room, under the watchful eye of her father, and make small talk while your date finished getting ready upstairs. Her father would ask you questions, where you were going, what time you'd be back, what your intentions were, and you'd answer politely, respectfully, because that was the deal. If you wanted to take his daughter out, you had to prove you were worthy, that you'd take care of her, that you'd bring her home safely. It wasn't about control, it was about care, about a father's love taking the shape of vigilance. And when she finally came down the stairs, dressed in her best dress, hair curled, lipstick just right, you'd forget every nervous word you'd rehearsed, because she was beautiful, and she was with you. The first date was always the same. Dinner at a diner, a movie, maybe a dance. You'd drive her in your car or your dad's car, if you were lucky enough to borrow it. You'd open the door for her, pull out her chair, pay for everything, even if it meant you'd be broke for the rest of the week. At the diner, you'd sit across from each other in a vinyl booth, sharing a milkshake with 2 straws, vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. It didn't matter. What mattered was the excuse to lean in close, to laugh over something small, to watch the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. The jukebox would be playing in the corner, Elvis the Platters, Buddy Holly, songs that made you want to get up and dance, even though you were terrible at it. And maybe, if the night was going well, you'd drop a nickel in the slot and play her favorite song, and she'd smile, and you'd know you'd done something right. At the movies, you'd sit in the dark, pretending to watch the screen, but really watching her. The way the flickering light played across her face, the way she laughed at the funny parts, the way she jumped during the scary ones and grabbed your arm without thinking. And if you were brave, you'd reach over and take her hand, slowly, tentatively, giving her the chance to pull away if she wanted to. But she didn't. She laced her fingers through yours and held on. And suddenly, the movie didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the feeling of her hand in yours and the knowledge that she wanted to be there, with you. After the movie, you'd drive not home, not yet. You'd find a place to park, a lookout point, a quiet street, somewhere you could talk without the world watching. And you'd talk, really talk, about everything and nothing. Your dreams, your fears, your favorite songs, what you wanted to be when you grew up, what scared you about the future. There was no hurry, no checklist of things to accomplish, no pressure to move things forward. Just 2 people, sitting in a car, learning each other. And when you finally brought her home, you'd walk her to the door, not because you had to, but because it was the right thing to do. You'd stand there on the porch, under the glow of the porch light, and you'd say goodnight. And if the night had gone really well, maybe, just maybe, you'd kiss her. Not a long kiss, not a dramatic one, just a soft, sweet, tentative brush of lips that lasted 3 seconds and felt like forever. And then she'd slip inside, and you'd drive home, replaying every single moment, every word, every smile, until you fell asleep with her name on your lips. But the courtship didn't end there. It was only beginning. Because in the 1950s, you didn't just text someone good morning and call it a day. You wrote letters, real letters, on paper, in pen. You'd sit at your desk, chewing on the end of your pen, trying to find the right words, trying to sound clever or romantic, or at least not completely ridiculous. You'd write about your day, about the song that reminded you of her, about how much you were looking forward to seeing her again. And then you'd fold it carefully, slide it into an envelope, write her name and address in your neatest handwriting, and mail it. And then you'd wait, days, sometimes a week, for her reply. You'd check the mailbox every day, multiple times a day, hoping, waiting. And when her letter finally arrived, you'd recognize it immediately. The handwriting, the faint smell of her perfume on the paper. You'd take it to your room and read it slowly, savoring every word, every loop of her handwriting, every little detail she included. And then you'd read it again, and again, until you had it memorized. Those letters were treasures. You didn't delete them. You didn't lose them in a thread of messages. You kept them, in a box, tied with a ribbon, hidden under your bed or in the back of a drawer, because those letters were proof. Proof that someone cared, that someone took the time to sit down and think about you and put their feelings into words. If you were going steady, really going steady, he'd to give you his class ring or his Letterman jacket. Something big, something visible, something that told the world you were together, and you'd wear it with pride. The ring on a chain around your neck, the jacket draped over your shoulders, sleeves hanging past your hands. It was a statement, a promise, a way of saying, I'm hers, or I'm his, without saying anything at all. There were rules about dating, unspoken but understood. You didn't spend time alone in a house when parents weren't home. You didn't go too far too fast. You didn't talk about certain things, not because people were naive, but because there was a structure, a progression, a belief that some things were worth waiting for. And most people waited, not all, but most, because love wasn't just about feelings, it was about respect, about intention, about building something that could last. Friday nights meant dances, school dances, community dances, church dances. The gym would be transformed with streamers and balloons. A band or a DJ with records would set up in the corner. Girls would arrive in groups, giggling and nervous. Boys would stand on the other side of the room, working up the courage to ask someone to dance. And when the music started slow and sweet, something by the Platters or Nat King Cole'd walk across that vast, terrifying distance and hold out your hand. Would you like to dance? And she'd take it, and you'd pull her close, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers, and you'd sway. Not quite in time with the music, but it didn't matter, because in that moment, with her head on your shoulder and the whole world spinning around you, you weren't just dancing. You were falling in love, slowly, carefully, completely. Sunday afternoons were for drives, long, aimless drives through the countryside, windows down, radio playing, her sitting close beside you. You'd talk about the future, about getting married someday, about the house you'd live in, the kids you'd have, the life you'd build together. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a plan. Because that's what people did. They met, they dated, they fell in love, and then they got married. There was a path, and most people followed it, not because they had to, but because it made sense, because it felt right. And when you finally decided to propose, you'd do it properly. You'd save up for a ring, nothing extravagant, just something simple and beautiful, something she could wear for the rest of her life. You'd plan the moment, maybe at her favorite spot, maybe after a dinner you could barely afford, maybe on a quiet walk under the stars, and you'd get down on one knee, and you'd ask, and she'd cry, and say yes, and you'd slip the ring on her finger, and everything you'd dreamed about would suddenly feel real. But even after the engagement, you waited. You didn't move in together. You didn't skip steps. You planned a wedding. You invited everyone you knew. You stood in front of your families and your community and made promises, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, and you meant it. Because love in the 1950s wasn't disposable. It wasn't something you tried on and tossed aside if it didn't fit. It was a commitment, a choice, something you worked at, even when it was hard. Of course, not every love story had a happy ending. Hearts broke in the 1950s just like they do now. But even heartbreak felt different, because when someone said, I love you, they meant it. When they made a promise, they kept it. When they walked away, it wasn't because they got bored or found someone more interesting. It was because something real had changed, and that made it hurt more. But it also made it matter more. You didn't move on in a week. You didn't download an app and start over. You sat with the pain. You wrote sad letters you never sent. You listened to sad songs on the radio and let yourself feel it. And eventually, slowly, you healed. Maybe that's what we've lost. Not the innocence, not the simplicity, but the weight of words, the weight of time, the weight of showing up, again and again, and choosing someone, even when it wasn't easy. Love in the 1950s wasn't perfect. People made mistakes. Hearts got broken. Not everyone found their happy ending, but there was something sacred about it, something intentional. Every date was planned. Every letter was written by hand. Every moment together was earned, not assumed. And maybe that's why those love stories still resonate. Why grandparents' eyes still light up when they talk about the first time they met. Why old couples still hold hands in the grocery store. Because their love wasn't instant. It was built, brick by brick, letter by letter, dance by dance, and it lasted, not because it was easy, but because they chose it, every single day. So if you grew up in the 1950s, you remember the butterflies, the waiting, the hoping, the way a slow song could turn strangers into soulmates. You remember the smell of perfume on an envelope, the weight of a class ring on a chain, the feeling of a hand in yours in a dark movie theater. You remember what it felt like to fall in love when love required courage, patience, and presence. And if you didn't grow up in the 1950s, maybe you can still imagine it. Close your eyes and picture it. A jukebox in the corner, 2 straws in a milkshake, a letter arriving in the mail. A world where I love you wasn't typed. It was spoken face to face, heart to heart, where love didn't need filters or likes or validation from strangers. It just needed 2 people. And the willingness to try. Because falling in love in the 1950s wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth the wait. And once you found them, you held on. Because yesterday never truly disappeared. It just learned to hold hands in the dark. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. The crackling hum of a jukebox. The rustle of a letter being unfolded. The whispered words on a front porch under the stars. I'll see you tomorrow. And tomorrow couldn't come fast enough.